Hello and welcome to the latest Royal Roundup from TalkTV. So pop the kettle on. This is The Royalty. I'm Sarah Hewson. Coming up on today's show, the King's second coronation in Scotland, how the Princess of Wales took on the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and why Harry and Meghan believe they are repeatedly unlucky. Joining me to discuss all of that and lots more, our royal commentator and TalkTV regular Afia Hagan, The Times' Val Lowe, and The Sun's former royal editor Duncan Larkham. Hello to all of you. Now, King Charles was presented with the honours of Scotland during a ceremony at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh on Wednesday. He was watched by his wife, Queen Camilla, and the Prince and Princess of Wales, or the Duke and Duchess of Rothesay, to give them their Scottish titles. Afia, a lot of people were asking about this, why it was happening. After we had the big coronation in Westminster Abbey, what was this all about in Scotland?
So this service of Thanksgiving with the People's Procession, with a fly past by the RAF, was something that was revived after the Queen's coronation in 1953. And we've had it for the King's coronation this year as well. And it's also a real focal point in Holyrood Week, which is a huge week for the royal family, where they gather in Scotland, they get the keys to the city of Edinburgh and take part in lots of events with the local community. The royal family love Scotland. I love Scotland. It's an amazing place. So it's a great chance for them to have this celebration. It's also a great chance to put Scotland, on the map, as it were. Because Scotland is very important to the monarchy, very important to the royal family. Now, the royal family's popularity in Scotland has waned recently. A poll just before the coronation said that the popularity of the royal family was around, or the monarchy was around 52% in the United Kingdom in general, 56% in Wales, but 37% in Scotland. And so I think it was strategic, actually, that this service took place, that you had the procession, that you had the Scots Guards. We do pomp and pageantry so well in the United Kingdom, but I think bagpipes, for me, just take it up a level. You had pipers from Gordonston, from King Charles's old school, piping for him in the church. It's a real chance for Scotland to welcome, quote unquote, their new king.
Bagpipes, Duncan, and also some bling, some very old bling.
Oh, yes.
Britain's oldest crown jewels on display yesterday.
The oldest crown jewels, and a sword that was even heavier than the one used at Westminster Abbey. Yeah, I mean, it like Fia says, it's pomp and ceremony, but it does form quite an important function, and that is soft diplomacy. Soft diplomacy. When the Queen died, the scenes in Scotland, the number of people that turned out to see and pay their respects to her coffin as it was taken through, that set the scene really for I think what we saw this week. And you've still got a government in Scotland that are committed to making Scotland a republic, and that makes them unique in terms of the British Isles. So I think yesterday, the pomp and ceremony, the sight of the Scots Guards, the sights of the crowds will have, I think they will have gone down well with the government that are committed to keeping the United Kingdom together.
Duncan mentioned, Val, the Queen's death and the role that Scotland played. And actually, I couldn't help thinking yesterday, standing outside St Giles Cathedral, that those scenes in the days after her death, and as she lay in state at St Giles Cathedral, and Charles stood and held vigil around her coffin, and then yesterday to be back in that same space was quite poignant for him. But he looked a lot more relaxed than he did when he was in Westminster Abbey at the actual coronation.
Yes, one thing I remember about the coronation was he did look tense. He looked almost lost, I thought, in the coronation of Westminster Abbey. And it was noticeable how when he was leaving the Abbey, processing out, once it was all over, he relaxed.
He could breathe.
Yeah, he could breathe again. Very noticeable. But after the Queen's death, it was very noticeable how much was done in Scotland. There was an awful lot of concentration on Scotland, clearly in a deliberate attempt to sort of shore up the union, which they're always permanently worried about. And we saw that at the time of the referendum when the Queen made that famous intervention, telling people to think carefully before they voted.
And yet we had Hamza Yousaf, the First Minister, who is a Republican
Yeah.
himself, giving a reading in yesterday's service.
Yeah, I know that was, and he did a good job of it, didn't he? I thought that was a very significant moment.
Not everyone, though, Val, was welcoming what took place yesterday.
They weren't.
There were quite significant protests on the streets of Edinburgh.
Not only were there significant protests on the streets of Edinburgh, we could see them. So it was quite clear they were in vision with the cameras. They had a prime slot.
They
I think.
did.
And
Outside the cathedral where the royals drove in.
Exactly. So we could see it, and they had a lot of those "Not My King" banners, those banners we've seen a lot of recently. And what was also noticeable is the way that they were allowed to be there. They weren't arrested by the police. It was a sharp contrast to what happened at the coronation, when the Met, I think a lot of people would agree, acted very heavy-handedly, arrested people just because they were carrying luggage straps to secure their banners, arrested one woman, banged her up for several hours, who was an innocent bystander. She was in fact a royal fan. There was none of that in Scotland. I mean, there were a few arrests, but I think that was for people who were actually doing things like trying to climb over barriers or whatever. So I think the police in Scotland really have learned the lesson from the Met's mistakes.
Yeah, that was very noticeable, actually. The prime position that the protesters were given and allowed to have, and many of them from anti-monarchy campaign group Republic felt they hadn't had their voices heard and hadn't got that right to protest during the coronation. They got that yesterday. Police Scotland were out in huge numbers and yet took a much more standoffish approach and allowed it to take place. But also a fear. Duncan mentioned the new sword, the Elizabeth sword. Some controversy over the cost of that, £22,000, and the cost of yesterday's event paid for by the Scottish government and therefore the taxpayer.
And the leader of the Green Party, actually, you know, he was talking about this earlier on this week and made a statement yesterday saying that, you know, questioning why it's taking place, questioning the cost of the Queen Elizabeth sword, like you mentioned, cost £22,000. It was made at the end of last year for this particular event. And, you know, his point is that you have generational wealth, that you have, that's amongst this family. This is taking place against the backdrop of a cost of living crisis. You know, questioning why this is taking place, why are we spending this money? And I think it's also quite significant that this took place in St Giles Cathedral, where you have the Stone of Destiny, a really, really important and significant relic to Scotland that was stolen by King Edward I after the First Scottish War of Independence in 1296, before it was stolen back by 3 Scottish students in 1950, stole it from Westminster Abbey, took it back to Scotland. It turned up, you know, 3 months later in Scotland and then was in Arbroath Cathedral. The significance of that stone, the significance that this service took place in the presence of this stone that has long been a symbol of the war between Scotland and England that, yes, took place, you know, 1,000 years ago or whatever. But those feelings are quite clearly still there. And it is something that the monarchy and the royal family are going to have to reckon with now more than ever. The Queen had a real affinity for Scotland. King Charles III does as well. But now it's going to be up to the Duke and Duchess of Rothesay to put their roots into Scotland. You know, they've much more been, you know, associated with Wales. They spent time there, lived there. Prince William was a helicopter rescue pilot there. But you need to put down those roots in Scotland if you're going to keep Scotland on side.
They did go to university in Scotland at St Andrews,
Andrews, yeah,
so
that's true.
that does give them a connection. They'll have to play on that one if they're to do what you're suggesting. The King is meeting the President of the United States of America at Windsor Castle on Monday. The White House said the meeting was intended to further strengthen the close relationship between our nations. King Charles and Biden have previously met before he became king, including at the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow in November of 2021. But this is the first meeting since Charles became monarch. And Duncan, we've talked a lot about the late Queen and the relationships that she had with 13 US presidents. This meeting between King Charles and President Biden, how important is it?
Well, it's important because America are famously our biggest allies, and we are supposed to be their biggest allies, certainly in Europe. So it's important. Biden wasn't able to come to the coronation. His wife came in on his behalf. So I guess this is a slightly long overdue meeting. But it's interesting. This represents what this is the difference really for King Charles having been Prince Charles. It's this soft power, this soft diplomacy. And it will be very much the British government, the Foreign Office, keen to make this happen and make it work. And so I think, as the attention of the American media and the British media go towards Biden and the new king, if you like, I think, it's not like there's a lot riding on it, but it will be all love and it'll be all very, I won't say touchy-feely because technically Biden's not really allowed to touch a monarch. But there will be every effort expended to try and show that it's part of what they call that ongoing special relationship.
And it's not a state visit, is it, Val? It's almost a stopover on the way to the NATO summit.
It's less than a state visit, but more than a brush-by.
I like it.
But it would be interesting to know what they talk about, because one of the papers, before this was officially announced, one of the papers was suggesting that they were going to have talks about climate change. So will they talk about anything of substance behind the scenes? I'm sure we won't be told, but that would be very interesting to find out.
And what about Joe Biden and his relationship with Britain and his views on Britain, which have been in the headlines rather a lot?
Yeah, well, he's definitely got sort of, he's got mixed views about Britain, whether Ben Wallace should be Secretary General of NATO, or his views on Britain and Ireland, because Biden has always made the point that Biden is Irish, and therefore, because of that, has mixed views about the Brits. So whether the same warmth will be there, I don't know. It's very interesting to say. Biden went over to Northern Ireland for the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. I think putting his marker down there. And will the personal relationship be the same? Because it was noticeable that when Donald Trump, for instance, came over, he was absolutely in awe of the whole royal rigmarole and being in the presence of the Queen. It's the one time Donald Trump has almost been shut up. Not quite struck dumb by her, but the nearest you'll get. And of course, when Obama was here, famously had a sort of struck a very good rapport with the Queen. Will Biden and King Charles strike the same rapport? I'm not sure. We'll have to see.
Afia, what do you think? I mean, this is taking place at Windsor Castle. Joe Biden's been there before on the way back from the G7 summit.
Yeah.
What do you think the relationship between them will be like?
Well, I totally agree with Val that it's certainly not the golden era of Barack and Michelle Obama and the Queen and Prince Philip. And, they almost did a group hug at one point, almost, didn't they? They were like, the foursome that we didn't know that we needed. There was genuine warmth there. And, like you said, Trump was like just in awe of the Queen, just dumbstruck by her. I don't get the sense that King Charles III and Joe Biden are going to have that same warmth, that same rapport, unfortunately. I do think climate change will be something that they will bond over and will be quite high up in the agenda. But I certainly don't think that it will be as spectacular as it's been in the past.
Well, earlier this week, the Prince and Princess of Wales surprised NHS staff by dropping in to a tea party at a London hospital. William and Kate added the finishing touches to cupcakes and helped lay the tables at a reception at St Thomas's Hospital before the health service's 75th anniversary. Apparently they left guests at the tea party dumbstruck and in complete shock at these special royal guests. These kind of engagements, why do they matter, Val?
They matter because they show that the Prince and Princess of Wales care about the NHS. They're helping to create a brand, if that's not too cynical way of putting it, of caring about things which are politically not too contentious. And so, William has adopted homelessness. Kate has done a lot and has her Centre for Early Childhood, the study of early childhood. I mean, they want to kind of own issues where they can show that they care, they can reach out to people, they can engage with people. I mean, that was one of the things we saw at this NHS Tea Party, actually, you know, engaging with you know, ordinary members of the public. There was a sweet moment when this woman who had come over as part of the Windrush generation, so she's a grandmother, and she worked in the NHS, and the next two generations after her all worked in the NHS, and she reached over and gave William a hug across the tea table and said something like, "Come on, girls, eat your heart out." She was kind of magnificent. But you know, it's something that they can do. But of course, what's interesting is you know, the extent to which you can do these things and keep out of politics.
Well, but William almost strayed into contentious territory, Val, because he got into the jam versus cream first debate on the scones.
That was very rash of him, but he cleverly stood on the fence.
He did, he dodged it,
always
didn't
does.
he?
So Kate was not ashamed to, you know, nail her colours to the mast and say she's a jam first girl.
As the late Queen was.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Although if you look into the archives, what Buckingham Palace used to do, there are different variations. I've seen the palace being jam first, and I've seen the palace being cream first. So it's, you know, some recollections may vary.
Which we are going to talk about later. William dodged the question because he said he went for whatever was closest first.
Right, yeah.
And I suppose, given that he has now inherited the Duchy of Cornwall, he perhaps ought to take the Cornish stance, which I think is jam first, isn't it? And I am clearly a Devonshire girl when it comes to my scones because I'm cream first.
I'm cream first as well.
I'm cream first.
Well done. Val?
I'm with William. I couldn't care less.
Right.
Just give me a scone. Now, it was the Princess of Wales who pressed for the Queen to declare recollections may vary in her famous riposte to Harry and Meghan's Oprah Winfrey interview. That is according to Valentine Lowe's paperback edition of his book Courtiers, which has been published this week. It is out today as we're recording, Val.
It is, that's
It's a double
right.
celebration. It's your wedding anniversary
That's
as
right,
well,
yes,
isn't it?
yes.
Congratulations.
There
Thank you
we-
for sharing it with us. Val, you describe in the book Kate as being steely, even steelier than William. Tell me what you mean and the background to this.
So the background, so Oprah Winfrey interview where they lobbed several bombshells at the royal family. Most famously, the suggestion that someone, a senior member of the royal family, was racist by inquiring about the colour of the future baby's skin, Harry and Meghan's future baby's skin. So the palace took a long time to respond to this. So if you remember, the interview was broadcast on a Sunday night in the United States. Mm-hmm. So if you wanted to watch it here, you had to find some clever means of sort of hooking up to American TV. It was quite difficult, I remember. We all watched it overnight. The Queen was not going to respond until she'd watched it when it was broadcast on the Monday night on ITV in this country. So there was 24 hours when the palace was debating about how to respond.
By which time they knew all the headlines that had come out.
All the
they'd seen
headlines
all the
were out.
clips.
All the
Everybody
acres
was
of coverage.
talking about
It was
it.
all anyone was talking about, exactly. And they had a draft version of the statement quite quickly by about lunchtime, and it was quite bland, I think, because they were trying not to make the situation worse. So it had a reference to Harry and Meghan being much-loved members of the royal family, but it was William and Kate who said, no, this needs to be tougher. We need to say that we challenge the veracity of some of the things they say. And so they went away, and I actually discovered the author of the wonderful phrase, some recollections may vary. Everyone has always thought up to now that it was probably Clive Alderton, Sir Clive Alderton, who's now the King's private secretary. In fact, it was Jean-Christophe Grey, who's William's private secretary, and he'd only just started the job. I think he'd come from Downing Street, and he'd been in the job for something like 17 days.
Baptism of fire.
Baptism of fire. He was thrown into this sort of maelstrom. He came up with it. And then there was a debate about whether to keep the phrase in. And there were some people in other households who were worried. And they saw the point, obviously. But they thought it might antagonise Harry and Meghan further, and there'd be more rows. And what we wanted was less rows, more peace. But Kate pressed for it to stay in. She said, we've got to put down this marker. Because if we don't, people will believe what they say forever and a day. And we've got to say that, no, actually, it's not true. Not all of what they say is true. And she was very insistent. And it shows her toughness, her mental toughness, and also her ability to play a long game. She's going to be queen one day. And she's got the long-term stability of the royal family in her mind.
It also shows, Afia, though, the weight that her voice carries. The fact that she pushed for this to be kept in, and it remained.
Absolutely. On a statement that was from the Queen, essentially. Being part of that voice, being part of that narrative, it does show that she is listened to, that her voice is heard, that it counts, and absolutely, like you said, she's playing a long game, because by her saying, I want this statement to stay in there, we need to make sure that people don't believe everything that Harry and Meghan say, that we need to be able to cast some doubt. They need that going along. But the thing is, I think that putting that in there, having that line, recollections may vary, sort of did mean that there was more discussion about it. It did mean that, as well as doubt being cast on Harry and Meghan, it probably made them upset as well. And it probably made them say more things. It's kind of like not really a win-win, like you can't win, to be honest.
We also had, in those days afterwards, William responding to a journalist's question. He was doorstepped at an event, wasn't he? And usually they wouldn't say anything. And he was asked if they were a racist family. And he said, no, we're very much not a racist family.
Yeah.
And so you can see that this couple wanted to set the record straight on this.
You can see that. And I think it's interesting. I mean, it's an incredible revelation, as far as I'm concerned, that pressure came from Kate, because, of course, if you look at what was said during the Oprah Winfrey interview and subsequently, a lot of it were really quite personal attacks on Kate, saying that she deliberately briefed the media against Meghan, which is, I'm afraid, pie in the sky as far as my experiences as a journalist go. So having her involvement, having her listened to and involved in that process shows just how, even back then, before she became Princess of Wales as she is now, that Kate's voice would be heard, and William was there to support Kate's voice, and they would actually be able to make an actual proper contribution to something that really threw them into chaos. The Oprah Winfrey interview, the palace didn't want to respond to it at all. They wanted to stay completely quiet. But when that allegation was made, they had to say something. And quite key that the roots of that lay in Kate's influence on the palace.
And that statement will go down in history,
It
won't
will.
it?
Oh, it's
as does
fantastic
the interview. Val, what is your assessment of where relations are now?
Still pretty glacial, I have to say. I mean, there's been no outbreak of peace at all. And I think it'll be a long time before there is. Because one of the big problems is, in order for Harry and William to have peace talks, they've got to be able to communicate. And if William is worried that Harry is going to put it all over the media again, not so much leak it as sort of put it in a television interview or a book or whatever, it's very difficult to trust him and have an honest brother-to-brother talk. So,
But they're not a normal family anyway, with those kind of conversations going backwards and forwards between them, as we've learnt through the course of the last couple of years, haven't we?
Yeah, and often the relationship is made more difficult because they also communicate through their staff, through their courtiers, which just mucks everything up. It introduces a level of dysfunctionality into the whole thing. So I think that there is some way off. I mean, you know, King Charles would love for family relations to be better, and occasionally they sort of make a little peace signal, you know, say something nice about Harry or whatever. But I don't think it makes much difference. On the other hand, I don't think Harry and Meghan want to particularly continue waging war. I think a phrase someone in their camp used to me recently, "We're done," suggests that they're not interested in doing that. So I don't think we're particularly going to see more salvos fired from them. But, you know, this is a long way off.
Let's talk a little bit more now about the next steps for Harry and Meghan, because Rolling Stone magazine are the latest publication to have their say on the Sussexes. They are reportedly, according to the magazine, in their flop era. It claimed part of the issue the Sussexes are currently facing is that they have made their brand about their beef with the royal family. Now their feud has reached a stalemate, and it feels like there isn't much more to say. This follows on from Bloomberg, from the Wall Street Journal. I'm kind of losing count on these kind of big publications going for Harry and Meghan.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, what is the flop era? What is the flop era to Rolling Stone? I mean, I think that they're right in saying that they are not going to talk about their time in the royal family anymore. I think they've done that. They said that they've done all the look back projects, whether that's a documentary, whether that's Spare. They're done with that now, and now they're moving on to different projects. You know, there was a potential sort of period drama they're going to make. They have the Invictus Games documentary coming out. There's also a documentary about inspiring leaders. I think what Rolling Stone is saying that they think that people will only be interested if they're talking about the royal family. And now that they're going to move on from that, they consider that a flop. But actually, they're just going to put out different content. It probably will engage a different audience, people who might not be interested in all that royal family drama, but might be really interested in the conception of the Invictus Games. I don't know if that constitutes a flop. It's moving in a different direction. But perhaps Rolling Stone, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg think it will be a flop because it doesn't involve the royal family.
One of the comparisons Rolling Stone magazine makes is to the Kardashian family, the Kardashian Jenners and the matriarch of Kris Jenner, who constantly reinvents their image, and its suggestion is it's time for a reinvention now for Harry and Meghan. Val.
It is absolutely time for reinvention. But I would just say one other thing. What was notable about that Rolling Stone piece, it was written by a person who thinks that Harry and Meghan were the victims of a racist and misogynistic smear campaign by the UK press. So it was written by someone who's extremely sympathetic to their cause. So in a way, that person's voice should be listened to.
So the shifting sands.
It's really shifting sands. Whereas other of their setbacks recently should be taken with more of a pinch of salt. So when Spotify parted company with them, obviously it did reflect to a certain extent the way they felt that Harry and Meghan hadn't produced enough content. But Spotify has been having problems with their podcasts. They're moving away from the idea of celebrity-driven podcasts.
Even the Obamas found it difficult.
Yeah, so I think it reflects as much Spotify that as Harry and Meghan. But also, I think that when that Spotify executive was extremely critical. I mean, it was very entertaining how he called them grifters and so on. But he was someone who's already been critical of them. So that was not shifting sands. That was someone who was already against Harry and Meghan. So I think you have to kind of weigh up all these things quite subtly.
Well, the couple themselves believe they've been repeatedly unlucky. It's been reported that they were blaming the pandemic, the cost of living crisis, the death of the Queen, and more for the issues they've been having. What do you read into this? I mean, I don't know how much we can believe the sources that have suggested that they said they've had repeated bad luck, including Prince Philip's illness at the time of the Oprah Winfrey, etc.
Well, I think this is symptomatic of a couple that have become famous for moaning. I mean, they've made an awful lot of money by doing deals and selling out on the royal family, basically cashing in, if you like, on the royal family silver. But they have a reputation for moaning, poor me, poor us, we're the victims in all this. So to bring in things like the pandemic and the timely death of the Duke of Edinburgh, and even then the Queen's death, when they were already in Britain, embarking on a tour, which obviously got curtailed. I mean...
And I think it supposedly set back the date of Archetypes, Meghan's podcast, for
yes,
example.
and she'd done, I think, 2 and had several more to come. Well, yes, that's bad timing. A politician would tell you events. It's all about events. But I think there won't be an awful lot of sympathy for people to think, oh, well, poor old them having it in the way of their, it's if that's how they're thinking, and I hope to goodness it's not, frankly, I hope it's not how they're thinking. If that's how they're thinking, then really they are occupying planets somewhere far away from planet Earth.
Yeah, I mean, if that is what they're thinking, that, you know, Prince Philip's illness, the death of the Queen, well, those things are to blame for their lack of success. That's pretty callous sounding, isn't it? But we have to put this in context. We don't know what they're thinking.
Exactly.
There's an awful lot of people who want to talk about it.
Exactly. And I think that actually is the point, that we don't know what they're thinking. I don't know how much I believe this, you know, where did it come from? Where are the sources? Could this be 17th, 18th, 19th hand? Could it have been an off-the-cuff comment that's been made into this big thing? To be honest, I don't know how much I believe that. But I also think there's a lot of people who around the world who would say, gosh, the timing of that pandemic was horrible, because it was. Because the pandemic was horrible, you know?
I just say, they're world famous. Everyone listens to them. They've had TV series. They've had a best-selling book. They live in a mansion in Montecito. I could do with some of their bad luck.
True.
Good point.
Fair point, Val. They've also been pictured going about their private lives by a photographer who launched a YouTube channel with Thomas Markle. Now, Carl Larson was credited on the pictures of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, published online over the weekend, which showed them arriving at an office in Santa Barbara. He shared an image of the coverage on his Instagram stories, writing, "So nice to see my friends Harry and Meghan on Friday before they get away for the long weekend." And the suggestion was that he said, don't believe everything you read or hear about them not being happy. They're perfectly happy and relaxed. This is all a bit strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
This couple who definitely don't like paparazzis. This is supposedly a friend taking what appear to be pap shots.
Yeah.
And then he had a YouTube series with Meghan's estranged father.
Okay, so for me, what was weird about this is it's the caption, "So nice to see my friends Harry and Meghan before they get away for the long weekend." No, you didn't see them. You papped them from a distance. It's not like you sat down and had lunch with them, or you went up to them and said, "Hi, how are you doing?" That's not what happened. So that, for me, is a very strange caption.
Yeah, though
to
there's
write.
been some suggestion online that these were set up, staged.
Could be, could not be. We don't know. But also the fact that he had a YouTube channel with Thomas Markle, it's like you've gone from one side to the other. Something is not sitting well with me.
Val?
It's a complete mystery, I think. But Meghan is a great calculator, isn't she? I mean, I think these days she's rarely photographed without it being under her control. The only time recently was, of course, the infamous chase through the streets of New York. But normally she's in control, and I find it slightly hard to believe that she didn't know those photographs were being taken. We'll see, but you know, he doesn't sound like a friend of hers. But
No. People who want to be friends with them. And of course, it makes a lot of money for photographers to get a picture of them, as we know. Well, that is all we've got time for this week. My thanks to Afia, Valentine and Duncan. We will be back next week with all of the latest on the royal family. We hope you can join us. We'll see you then.